deep dive into something pretty interesting. We're going all the way down into Smyrna, Georgia, and specifically their cybersecurity scene.
Sounds exciting.
It is, actually. By the end of this, you'll know more than just about anyone else about how Smyrna is planning to beef up all of its cyber defenses. We've got a lot of great sources to work with for this one. We've got some official documents from the City of Smyrna itself, a playbook written by a consulting firm about how to win a contract with a city like Smyrna, and even some legal stuff.
Wow, so this is like a real insider's view then.
Yeah, pretty much. We're going to see how Smyrna is trying to protect itself, how companies are trying to win the contract to protect Smyrna, and all of the legal stuff that everyone has to deal with. And, oh, I almost forgot to mention, there's a fascinating twist, too. There's this idea that the city might be able to save a lot of money by working with international cybersecurity experts.
That's interesting. I can't wait to hear more about that.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so to get us started, the first thing to know is that Smyrna has put out something called an RFP. That stands for Request for Proposals. And this RFP is asking companies to submit their plans for both a 5-year cybersecurity plan and an incident response plan.
So they're really thinking ahead. They want to know not just how to protect themselves in the long term, but also what to do if something bad does happen.
Exactly. They're not just thinking about, like, buying a new firewall or something. They want a whole strategy for the future of their cybersecurity. And on top of that, they're being super serious about this.
How so?
Well, this whole project is actually being funded by the federal government through GEMA, which is the Georgia Emergency Management and Homeland Security Agency, and also by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS.
Right. And that means that whoever wins this contract is going to have to meet a ton of really strict compliance requirements. We're talking about things like FISMA, NIST 853, and DHS standards. This is not some optional upgrade for Smyrna. This is serious business.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm kind of starting to feel bad for whoever wins this contract.
Oh, I'm sure they'll be up for the challenge.
Yeah, true. Okay, so we've established that Smyrna is serious about this, and there's a lot at stake. But what exactly are they asking for in this RFP? I mean, what does a cybersecurity makeover even look like?
It's a pretty long list. They're asking for proposals on how to improve their policies, how to secure their computer networks and servers, how to upgrade the physical security of their facilities, and even how to do a better job of training their employees about cybersecurity best practices. Everything is on the table here.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty impressive, actually. It really shows a commitment to doing this right and to taking a comprehensive approach.
Exactly. And one thing that stands out to me is how much emphasis they're putting on the human element of cybersecurity.
Yeah, I'm seeing that too. Like, one of the things they're requiring is that the winning bidder conducts tabletop exercises.
Oh, yeah, those can be interesting.
Yeah. Have you ever done one of those?
Oh, I've been through a few of those, yeah.
For those who don't know, a tabletop exercise is basically a simulation where you pretend that there's been a cyber attack and everyone has to figure out what they would do.
Right. You get together with all the key players and run through different scenarios, like what would you do if the city's website went down? Or if someone tried to steal sensitive data from your servers?
Yeah, exactly. And it can get pretty intense, too. I remember one time at a previous job, we did a phishing simulation to see how many people would click on a suspicious link.
Mm-hmm.
It's surprisingly effective and a little embarrassing for those who fell for it.
Yeah, they can be pretty nerve-wracking, but they're just so valuable. It's like a fire drill, but for your digital life. And in Smyrna's case, it shows they're not just relying on technology to protect them, they're also investing in making sure that their people are aware of the risks and know what to do in an emergency.
Totally. So I'm really impressed by Smyrna's approach here, and I think it's something that other cities can learn from. But okay, we've talked a lot about what Smyrna wants. Now let's flip the script and look at things from a potential bidder's perspective. We've got this document from this consulting firm called Collab P, and it's like they're handing us the playbook on how to win this contract.
It is a fascinating document, very illuminating to see how a consulting firm approaches a project like this.
Yeah, I'm super curious about what they have to say.
Well, for one thing, they recommend that anyone bidding on this project should assemble a team with very specific roles, and they get into a lot of detail about what those roles should be. But here's the really interesting part. Collab P suggests that for some of those roles, especially the more technical ones, bidders should consider using international experts.
Hold on, international experts.
Yep, they're calling it a hybrid approach.
I mean, I get it, but using people who aren't even in the U.S. to protect a city in Georgia, I'm intrigued, but honestly, I'm a little skeptical too. Is that really going to work? I mean, would that even be legal?
Well, Collab P seems to think so. Their argument is all about cost savings. And it makes sense, right? Certain cybersecurity roles like penetration testers or security analysts can command really high salaries in the US.
Yeah, for sure.
So by tapping into international talent, especially for the more technical aspects, a bidder could potentially offer Smyrna a much lower price than a company that's only using US-based experts.
Hmm, that's a good point. Saving taxpayer money is always a win, especially in today's economy. But I can't help but wonder about the potential downsides. Like, what about communication challenges? I mean, there are going to be time zone differences and maybe even language barriers.
Yeah, those are valid concerns, and Collab P does acknowledge some of those challenges, but they also lay out a very structured workflow for how the on-site and remote teams would collaborate, with clear roles and responsibilities for everyone involved.
Okay, so they thought about that part. But what about security risks? I mean, wouldn't it be risky to give people in other countries access to sensitive government data?
Hmm.
That just seems like a recipe for disaster.
Well, that's where the legal stuff comes in. And to be honest, it gets pretty complex. There are a lot of compliance requirements that any bidder, whether they're using international experts or not, is going to have to meet.
Yeah, we touched on that earlier, like FISMA. I know that's a big one, but to be honest, I don't really know what it means.
Well, think of FISMA, the Federal Information Security Management Act, as like the overarching rule book for cybersecurity in the federal government. It sets the baseline for how government agencies are supposed to protect their data and their systems, and that goes for any company that's working with them, too.
Okay, that makes sense. So FISMA is like the constitution for protecting government data.
Exactly. And then there's NIST 853. That's a whole set of security controls and best practices that agencies are supposed to follow. Think of that as like the detailed instruction manual for actually putting those FISMA rules into practice.
Got it. So FISMA is the big picture, and NIST is the nitty-gritty details.
Exactly. And then, of course, there are the DHS standards, which are specifically focused on protecting critical infrastructure and national security. So any bidder is going to have to be familiar with all of these frameworks and be able to demonstrate that they can meet those requirements.
Wow, so it's not just about being good at cybersecurity, it's also about understanding a whole bunch of government regulations, too.
It's all part of the package, and it's definitely a challenge. But here's something that really surprised me. Collab P actually points out that even international bidders, even companies that are based in other countries, have to comply with these U.S. standards if they want to work on a project like this.
Really? Why is that? I mean, shouldn't they just follow their own country's laws?
It's tricky, but basically, because this project involves U.S. government data and funding, U.S. law takes precedence. It doesn't matter where the work is being done, those U.S. cybersecurity standards still apply.
Wow, that's intense. So international bidders have to be fluent in U.S. cybersecurity law, too.
Pretty much. And honestly, that just highlights how complex this whole thing is. I mean, imagine the logistics of putting together all the necessary documents, certifications, and approvals to prove that you meet all of these requirements. It would be a massive undertaking.
Yeah, that makes my head spin just thinking about it. Okay, so let's say a bidder has managed to jump through all of those hoops and prove that they can handle the compliance side of things. How does Collab P suggest they actually make this hybrid team structure work in practice? Like, how do you manage a team where some people are halfway across the world?
Well, they emphasize the importance of really clear communication protocols and well-defined workflows.
Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more.
Like, let's say the team is doing a penetration test to find vulnerabilities in Smyrna's systems.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But how would that work with a team spread across the globe?
Well, the remote team, with their specialized skills, would handle the technical work of actually trying to break into the system. But the on-site team would be responsible for things like granting access to those systems, making sure that everything is being done in compliance with all those regulations, and reporting back to the city about what's being found.
So it's kind of like a checks and balances system to make sure that everything is being done by the book.
Yeah, exactly. And it also helps to address some of those security concerns you mentioned earlier. By having a US-based team involved in the process, you can make sure that sensitive data is being handled appropriately and that no one is overstepping their bounds.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better. But even with all that in place, there are still bound to be communication challenges, right? I mean, we're talking about different time zones, maybe even different languages, and definitely different cultural norms. How do you overcome all of that?
That's a great question, and it's one that Collab P addresses directly. They recommend that bidders use FedRAMP-approved platforms for all of their communication and collaboration.
Okay, and what's FedRAMP? Another acronym.
It stands for the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program, and it's basically a set of security standards that cloud-based services have to meet in order to be used by the federal government. So using FedRAMP-approved platforms ensures that all those communications are secure and compliant with all those regulations.
Got it. So even if the team is spread across the globe, they're all using these secure, government-approved tools to talk to each other and share information.
Exactly. And that's a really important part of making this hybrid model work. You need the right tools, but you also need the right people too. And Collab P makes it clear that this is not just about finding the cheapest labor, it's about finding the right expertise and the right cultural fit.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, I'm starting to see how this could potentially work. It's a really fascinating idea, and it definitely has the potential to shake things up in the world of cybersecurity contracting. But it's also really complex, and there are definitely a lot of challenges that would need to be overcome.
Yeah, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, that's for sure. But I think it's a really interesting trend to watch, and I'm curious to see how it plays out in the long run.
Okay, so we've got a good understanding of what Smyrna is looking for, and we've seen how companies like Collab P are thinking about how to win this contract. Now let's turn our attention to the potential players. We've got a list here of companies in Georgia that specialize in cybersecurity. And the real question is, who's going to throw their hat in the ring for this project?
That's right. It'll be interesting to see who decides to bid on this contract and how they approach those challenges we've been discussing. Will they go with a traditional on-site model, or will they embrace this new hybrid approach? And who's going to be able to convince Smyrna that they're the right partner to protect the city's digital future?
It's like a cybersecurity mystery, and we're about to start solving it. So let's dive into this list and see who the contenders are. First up, we've got Synergy Tech Consulting. They're based in Atlanta, and they have a pretty good track record working with government agencies.
Ooh, that could be a good sign. Let's see what they're all about.
Yeah, that local experience could be a real asset when it comes to working with the city government in Georgia, because they'd understand the specific challenges and nuances there.
But didn't you say earlier that Smyrna's open to that global approach?
I did, yeah.
So does Synergy Tech have that international experience?
From what I can tell, not really. It looks like their expertise is more focused on the traditional on-site consulting.
Okay, so maybe not the best fit for this particular project since they don't seem like they have that international component. What about the next one on the list?
Let's see, APG Emerging Tech. They're also in Atlanta, and they say they're experts in cloud security, which seems like it would be pretty relevant for Smyrna.
Yeah, cloud security is a huge deal these days, especially for governments.
Absolutely. But one thing to keep in mind with APG is that they're a relatively new company. And remember, Smyrna's looking for a proven track record, especially when it comes to compliance with all those federal regulations we talked about earlier.
Right, FISMA, NIST, and all that.
Exactly. And honestly, I'm not sure APG has the experience for a project of this scale and complexity.
Yeah, experience matters, especially when you're dealing with sensitive government data. Okay, what about the next one?
The Coleman Group. They've been around for a while, and they have a pretty diverse portfolio of services.
Okay, that sounds promising. Do they do cybersecurity, though?
They do, but from what I've seen, they seem to be more focused on the private sector. So while they might have some cybersecurity expertise, it's not clear if they have the experience working with government contracts and with those compliance requirements that Smyrna's looking for.
Yeah, you're right. Government work is a whole different ballgame.
It is. It is.
Okay, so we've got 3 companies so far, and none of them seem like a perfect match. This is making me realize how tricky it must be to find the right cybersecurity partner. You can't just Google cybersecurity firms in Georgia and pick the first one that pops up.
Yeah, it's definitely not that simple. This RFP from Smyrna requires a very specific set of skills and experience. It's like trying to find a unicorn.
Yeah, a cybersecurity unicorn. Okay, well, let's keep hunting for that unicorn. What about InfoSmart Technologies? They're based in Sewanee, and it says here they have experience working with municipalities in Georgia, so that's good.
That is promising. That local government experience is definitely a plus.
Right, but are they cybersecurity experts?
Well, they might have some cybersecurity expertise, but their primary focus, at least from what I can tell, seems to be more on IT infrastructure. So things like setting up networks, managing servers, that kind of stuff. Not necessarily the cybersecurity piece specifically.
Ah, so maybe not the cybersecurity gurus we're looking for. But could they potentially team up with another company that specializes in security?
That's definitely a possibility. And actually, Collab P recommends that bidders consider strategic partnerships like that. Even if a company doesn't have all the expertise in-house, they can still create a winning bid by collaborating with other firms that have those missing pieces.
That's a good point. It's like assembling the Avengers of cybersecurity. Each company brings its own unique superpower to the table.
I like that, the cybersecurity Avengers.
All right, let's look at a few more companies on this list. Team 7 Consulting caught my eye. They're in Atlanta, and they specifically mention cybersecurity services.
Yeah, I see that. But looking at their website, it seems like they mostly focus on penetration testing and vulnerability assessments.
Okay, so that's like trying to break into a system to see if they can find any weaknesses, right?
Exactly.
That's important, but it doesn't seem like that would cover the full scope of what Smyrna needs.
You're right. Remember, they're looking for a long-term strategy, a 5-year plan to really build up their cybersecurity posture, not just a one-time checkup.
Right. So Team 7 would need to partner up with someone who could handle those bigger picture, more strategic elements. What about RWD Consulting? I think their name came up earlier.
Yes, RWD was actually mentioned by Collab P as a potential international partner. They're interesting because they're based in Atlanta, but they also have a global reach, and they specialize in cybersecurity strategy and compliance.
Oh, that's interesting. So they could potentially be the ones to handle the more technical heavy lifting, while a U.S.-based firm takes care of the on-site coordination and compliance.
Exactly, and that would be a perfect example of that hybrid model we were talking about earlier.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together. It's like a giant puzzle, and each company could potentially bring a different piece to the solution.
And it's not just about finding the right pieces, but also about making sure that they fit together seamlessly.
What do you mean?
Well, communication and collaboration are going to be so important. Everyone involved has to have a shared understanding of Smyrna's goals, and they need to be able to work together effectively, even if they're spread across the globe.
Yeah, like a team sport, not a solo mission.
Exactly. It's not about one company being the hero. It's about everyone working together to protect Smyrna from cyber threats. And it will be fascinating to see which approach Smyrna chooses in the end. Will they go with a local firm that they're familiar with? Or will they embrace this global model and potentially save some money in the process?
It's a tough decision for sure. And it'll be interesting to see how their decision impacts the future of cybersecurity contracting in the public sector. But, okay, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a step back and recap what we've learned from all of these documents. What are the key takeaways for our listener?
Yeah, so I think the big takeaway here is that Smyrna is not messing around when it comes to cybersecurity. They're not just doing the bare minimum to check some boxes. They're really trying to take a holistic, proactive approach to protecting themselves.
I totally agree. It's really impressive to see. They're thinking long-term with that 5-year plan. They're investing in training and awareness for their employees. And they're even open to innovative models like bringing in those international experts. It shows that they're really committed to creating a culture of security, which is so important these days.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people think of cybersecurity as being all about technology. Like, if you just buy the right software or hardware, you'll be safe. But that's really not the case, is it? Not at all. Even with the best technology in place, the human element is still one of the biggest vulnerabilities. People make mistakes, they fall for phishing scams, they click on malicious links, and that's why Smyrna's focus on training and awareness is so important.
So true. You can have the strongest lock on your door, but if you leave the key under the mat, it doesn't really matter.
Exactly. Okay, but speaking of vulnerabilities, we can't forget about all those compliance requirements we talked about earlier. FISMA, NIST, DHS, it's a lot to keep track of.
Yeah, for someone who's not a cybersecurity expert, it can seem really overwhelming. And honestly, it makes me wonder, why bother? I mean, is all of that really necessary?
Oh, it definitely is. Those standards are there for a reason. They're designed to protect sensitive data and to ensure that government agencies are taking cybersecurity seriously. It's like having a safety net. It might seem complicated, but ultimately it's there to protect everyone involved.
Right, it's like having building codes,
Yeah.
They might seem like a hassle, but they're there to make sure that buildings are safe and structurally sound.
Exactly. And it brings up an interesting question for our listeners. With cyber threats constantly evolving and new vulnerabilities being discovered all the time, how can cities like Smyrna stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, it's like a never-ending race, right? As soon as you fix one vulnerability, another one pops up. So how do they keep up?
Well, continuous monitoring and improvement are essential. They need to regularly reassess their vulnerabilities, update their systems and policies, and provide ongoing training for their employees.
So it's not a one-time thing, it's an ongoing process.
Exactly. It's like a car. You need to do regular maintenance and tune-ups to keep it running smoothly. You can't just buy it and expect it to run forever without any attention.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And I guess, just like with a car, you might need to bring in specialists from time to time, right? Smyrna might need to consult with outside experts, maybe even those international experts we talked about earlier, to stay up to date on the latest threats and best practices.
That's right. Cybersecurity is a constantly evolving field, and it takes a lot of expertise and resources to stay ahead of the bad guys.
And it's not just about what Smyrna does on its own.
Right.
There's a whole community of cybersecurity professionals and organizations out there, and collaboration is key.
Absolutely. There's strength in numbers, and by sharing information and best practices, everyone can benefit.
So it's not just about going it alone, it's about working together to make the whole system more secure.
Exactly. And, it makes you think, what if all cities worked together on cybersecurity? Like, what if they formed a cybersecurity league of extraordinary cities sharing information and resources to protect each other from threats?
Haha, that's a great idea. Maybe we should pitch that to someone.
Well, a little collaboration can go a long way. Even simple things like sharing information about phishing attempts or malware attacks can help everyone stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, there's no reason to keep all of that intelligence siloed. The more we share, the better protected we all are.
Exactly. Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground here today, and hopefully our listeners have a much better understanding of what's going on in Smyrna, Georgia, and the challenges and opportunities that cities like Smyrna are facing when it comes to cybersecurity.
We've gone from RFPs to tabletop exercises, from international experts to compliance jungles, and hopefully we've answered some of your questions and maybe even sparked some new ones.
We have. And we've talked about the importance of taking a holistic approach to cybersecurity, of investing in people as well as technology, and of staying vigilant and adapting to new threats.
We've also talked about the importance of collaboration and information sharing and the need for continuous monitoring and improvement.
And most importantly, we've talked about why all of this matters, not just for government agencies, but for all of us who rely on technology in our daily lives.
So to wrap things up, if you're interested in learning more about cybersecurity, there are a ton of great resources available online. You can check out the websites of NIST and DHS, or you can look for organizations like the MS-ISAC, the Multi-Seat Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which helps state and local governments improve their cybersecurity posture.
And if you have any thoughts or predictions about what approach Smyrna will take, or any questions about cybersecurity in general, we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on our website or on social media.
So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe online.